We welcome you to the introductory meeting of the fiscal year 2021 budget cycle. We are the 4 members of the Budget Committee. I am Leslie Tarkington, the chair. On my right, we have Deborah Hess and Jeff Raymer. And on my left, Leslie Moriarty. Thank you for your interest in our town and budget and for attending this evening's meeting. If you intend to speak, please sign up on the appropriate sheets, which are on the table near the clock, and also where Peter Minarski, Town Controller, is standing, so right over there. Please then give your sign up to Peter or to Kathy Sidor, who's sitting over here, our recording clerk, and they will get them to the dais, and we will then, put them in the process. If you We will receive the operating and capital budgets from both the town and the Board of Education this evening. Fred Camillo, our first selectman, new to his first budget presentation, will present the town operating and capital budget. At 6:30 p.m., Peter Bernstein, chairman of the Board of Education, and Dr. Tony Jones, also new to our budget process, will present the Board of Education budget. At 7 p.m., there will be an opportunity for you, the public, to provide your input on the upcoming budget. So Fred, we're ready for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Budget Committee, and guests. Okay, I'm honored to be here tonight to present my first ever budget, first selectman's budget, and to officially have a bullseye on my back. But hopefully, at the end of the day, most people will like what we've done here. You're going to see this right here is a word cloud, and when we looked at the budget guidelines, these were the things that came out the most. The bigger they are, the more prevalent they were mentioned in the guidelines. So take a look at that, and that's, I guess you could see dollar signs all over those big words. Okay, so the BET guidelines. The fiscal year 21 budget will not be a status quo budget. The operating budgets will increase no more than, for the Board of Education, 2% over fiscal year 20, and for the town as a whole, it won't increase no more than 1.75%, according to the guidelines. Prioritized list. The prioritized list of additional budget reductions is 1.157 for the budget Board of Ed and $843,000 for the town. The BET anticipates a mill rate increase in the range of 2.5 to 3.5%. The areas of concern stated were cybersecurity, soil remediation, waste management costs, Nathaniel Witherall expenses, energy conservation efforts, and headcount. And this is the capital budget. Capital improvements substantially affect the fiscal vitality and quality of life in Greenwich. Capital improvements require a major initial investment, a significant and continuing financial commitment, and ultimately replacement. Capital improvements require careful, long-term planning and budgeting so that unforeseen financial emergencies do not curtail planned maintenance and necessary replacement. Article 2, Section 21 of the Town Charter, develop goals and objectives and establish priorities for spending for the ensuing fiscal year. Establish priorities with respect to recommended capital spending for all town agencies and develop a long-range capital spending plan. A public hearing was held on January 9th, just a few weeks ago. The general fund capital budget will be $79 million compared to a fiscal year 20 plan of $85.8 million. Of the $79 million total, the Board of Education request is just under $34 million. The 15-year plan is $1.44, close to $1.45 billion. And we are working actively every single day on public-private partnerships. The town's capital plan includes continuing to build work and focus that started in 2020. Funding has increased for cybersecurity programs, $551,000 for the town, and for the library, $50,000. Coordination efforts continue with Town Hall, the Board of Ed, the libraries, and Nathaniel Witherell, meeting with the Cybersecurity Task Force. Soil remediation projects, Greenwich High School, $2 million, Western Middle School, $8.5. Eastern Greenwich Civic Center replacement design funds, $230,000 for the design fund. The following year, $17 million for construction. An architect has been hired to begin the design to 30% and to seek MI and zoning approvals. Just, I'll stop there real quickly. When you see that $17 million, keep in mind that we plan on making that substantially less with our public-private partnerships. We have been meeting already with people, including someone that reached out immediately in December after the swearing in, and we expect that to be substantially less than $17 million. The Dorothy Hamill Rink facility improvements, a little over $1 million for design and construction plans, with $16 million for construction in fiscal year '23. A facility evaluation study has been completed, and again, just had a meeting 2 days ago with people interested in partnering with the town on the rink. So it's all good news. It's a continued effort, but that $16 million should be substantially less. The Cardinal Field improvements, $8.1 million to fully fund the project, option B, with access to the road from Route 1. Central Middle School Fields project, a little over $1 million to fully fund option 1, all grass reconstruction. $2.6 million for the design and creation of the educational specification for the possible renovation of JC Elementary School. The GEM Station 4 provides a permanent solution for the station located on King Street bordering the Griff Harris Golf Course. That's $2.15 million. And this is a big one that I talked about all summer long till I was losing my voice. Park restoration and work facility relocation, $1 million for funds to begin implementation and improvements to the Rogers Sherman Baldwin Park, which includes relocation of the Parks and Rec work facility. We don't want the trucks parked on the water anymore. We want to expand the park. Now we are coming to the Selectmen's operating budget expenses. The big things to look here is that we were told to keep within 1.75% of the guidelines. We are at 0.82% of the guidelines. Fixed charges, is a driver there, as well as the capital, 5.57, but we did keep it substantially lower than the 1.75% guidelines. Fixed charges, okay, that's the usual suspects. You have healthcare, pension contribution. When you look at Nathaniel Witherell, which I'm going to get into in a bit, you see a cut there of $1.5 million, and I will explain that. Okay, we are, with regard to Nathaniel Witherell, excuse me, something that's been near and dear to many of us, and in my case, most of my life. It's challenged funding, and we're challenging funding, and it's had all types of challenges, I meant to say. Reduced from $3 million to $1.5 million subsidy. We believe it's the best way to demonstrate a sense of urgency is to change the funding strategy. We have to take this serious. We can't keep doing the same thing over and over again. The BET formed a committee in March of 2016, submitted a report in December of 2017, subsequent report again submitted in December of 2019. Revenue. As you can see there, no change in the fund balance, state and federal aid. The big one here, very different, is something called pay-as-you-throw, and we will explain that more in detail now. BET guidelines, pay-as-you-throw. Increased costs for waste management and recycling will require new efforts to reduce volume at the transfer station. Thank you, man. Treat trash like other utilities. Charge for service based on how much of the service is used. Water, electricity, gas. Use more, you pay more. Current waste system encourages all you can eat. How pay-as-you-throw works. It's a bag-based system, also is known as SMART. The approach is the most effective means available of reducing municipal solid waste. What can you do? Greenwich can cut taxes or increase specific savings with other services with the savings. The residents purchase bags at local retailers. Proceeds go to the town. Most of it goes to the town. A bit goes to the state. And recycling is free. Pay-as-you-throw incentivizes residents to reduce waste. It changes behavior. Residents pay a unit-based fee for disposal each week through an official town bag. Trash is collected exactly the same way as before. Same drivers, same collection vehicles. Total department costs are reduced due to decreased waste generation. Municipal solid waste goes down. Communities also benefit from operational savings. So the budget impact here, the net revenue is just under $2.8 million. The trash tip savings would be a little over $934,000. Additional recycling tip costs, negative $259,000. Net financial impact, a little under $3.5 million. Pay-as-you-throw shifts disposal costs to users and gives residents and businesses more personal control. This gives you some scenarios here of how much you could save per month, less trash bags, regular trash bags per month, per household. And then we'll go to the environmental impact. Each year, pay-as-you-throw provides significant environmental benefits. According to the U.S. EPA's waste reduction model, these benefits would include the equivalent to the actions below. It's not all of them together. We're just taking what it could be in each instance. There's got to be a better way. We should study this more thoroughly and try other solutions first. These are the objections. The state of Connecticut, as well as other states and cities around the country, have worked for decades to find programs that increase recycling and reduce waste. Pay-as-you-throw is the single most effective way to reduce trash while saving money that we're aware of. And this is a website. This is live, this website now, if you want to learn more about it. Headcount change. As you can see there, a little bit down in the total general fund, and not much movement there in other town funds, 0.43% change. Okay, headcount change here. Okay, the town full-time positions eliminated. The 3 officers, this is a little bit of a change and something that, those of us who have been here forever, you do it with mixed emotions, because I always like the cops on the avenue, but even if you talk to the police, they say there's other things, better use of their time and manpower. And we're talking with the chief. We decided that, if we're going to have to save money, certainly this was something that we could do. So we would be saving there, the 3 positions, $265,000, not including the benefits. 1 fleet mechanic, $73,000, not including benefits. Town part-time positions, plus, minus in 10 different departments, it ends up equaling just under 2 full-time employees. Status. So the fiscal year 21 budget will not be a status quo budget. It's not. We have met the, increasing no more than 1.75%. We are at 0.82%. And with our mill rate increase, if this is followed here, it would fall within that 2.5 to 3.5 range at 2.53%. The BET guidelines stated areas of concern: cybersecurity, soil remediation, waste management costs, energy conservation efforts, Nathaniel Witherall expenses, and headcounts. We addressed them all. Budget increase of just over 3% includes $79 million of general fund capital, a mill rate increase from 11.682 to 11.977, a 2.53% raise increase, as I stated. Taxpayers with a $1 million assessed home value will have a $295 increase in property taxes. And that is it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
So I want to thank
You can thank him for
Fred Camillo for his brevity, and appreciate, we're just talking up here to determine the BOE budget was announced to begin at 6:30, but we think we can begin now. So if you would like to begin your presentation, Mr. Bernstein and Dr. Jones, or however you're starting it, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
I guess I'll just note my concern that when you post something for 6:30, you mean 6:30. So you may want to take a minute and think about that. So you've got a public posted agenda.
I'm having my lawyer talk with your lawyer.
Well, we thank the first selectman for not only cutting the budget, but cutting the time that it took to present the budget. I honestly think there's not much purpose to asking all these good people to wait for 11 minutes. I think you could start I recognize it was posted for 6:30. I'm pretty sure everybody who wanted to come is here. Thank you, Peter. I'll take responsibility for that.
So I'll just take a couple minutes here, Peter, to just sort of get it closer to 6:30, and we'll talk a little bit about our budget hearing process and what we'll be doing over the next several weeks. And that kind of gives you the feel. All of our meetings are open to the public, and they're all televised also, so you can watch them on Channel 79 or the YouTube, whatever way you choose to watch it. We start with next Tuesday at 10 o'clock, and the first selectman will be presenting his budget in more detail to us. And then probably around 10:45, we will be meeting with the police department, also with the parking department, talking with them thereafter. That's probably more like 11:45. We do some lunch, and then after lunch, we'll be meeting with the Department of Public Works and talking about some of their waste management issues. What we call day 2 is a full day of the Board of Education, and that day begins at 9 o'clock. Most of our meeting, I'm sorry?
You didn't say what day.
I'm sorry, day 2 is on Thursday, the 30th, and most of our meetings are held in the Town Hall Meeting Room, and all of them are posted online if you'd like to know where they're held. We continue the following week on Monday, Tuesday, and Friday with other departments, including on day 3, the 3rd, fire and health and human services. We, meet with the HR department and so forth and so on. Again, this is posted. Our agendas are posted for these meetings. They're formally posted for the dates, but our meetings themselves are, move around. It's more like a draft posting of the schedule. Some departments take more time, some less, some maybe a department head comes down with the flu or whatever. So those things happen, and we just fill in the space. The following day, day 4, is Parks and Rec, really in the morning, more or less, some fleet, and then we end that day with basically the land use departments. That's Tuesday, the 4th of February. And then we meet for the final day of that week, Friday, the 7th, and we meet with Nathaniel Witherall. We have a couple hours there. The Bruce Museum, the Perot Library before lunch, and then after the library, and more of DPW's departments, including the building maintenance, construction areas, et cetera. Day 8, we really spend on our own finances. The BET not only manages the town's budget, we have line responsibility for finance and also for the assessor's office. And so we'll be covering some of those areas. And then we have day 7, which is the 19th of February, and we'll be meeting with the law department. We have some executive sessions in some of these, and during those, the public has to be moved out. And then we proceed and spend more time with the town's IT department and perhaps specialized services from the Board of Education. We have a real success story in some shared services, the printing department. We want to hear about successes as well as tightening our budget or whatever it happens to be. And then we have an extra day because we find that we hold these sessions, there's always questions. We ask the departments to come back and, explain something in more detail or come back with another alternative. So we have a day, which we call Day 8 on the 25th of February. We then have discussions. We sort of talk about how does this budget all go together and what kind of changes do we make? And that is what we call Consolidation Day, and that day is on the 27th of February. And finally, we come to our decisions, and our decision days are the 2nd and 3rd of March. So, those days, again, start at 9 o'clock. This committee is all volunteer, and these days are basically, with the exception of 1 or 2, 9 to 4 o'clock meetings, and they're all, again, on television. So there's a lot of work to be done before we get to the point of this budget, which we then deliver over to the full 12-member BET. So anyway, thank you for your time, and we think you can begin, Mr. Bernstein.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the vamping. On behalf of the Greenwich Board of Education, I, along with Dr. Jones, are happy to present you with our operating and capital budgets for 2020, 2021. It's hard to say that. This budget was passed unanimously by our board in December and is presented to you tonight. Obviously, we'll be furthering the discussion with you next week. With that, let's see if I can get this to work. Maybe not. There we go. All right. So first, our operating budget. Basically meeting guidelines at 2.0%, so the total overall operating budget is $166,631,476. The capital budget is $35,755,000. Of that capital budget, there are 2 very large items in there, Cardinal Stadium, which Mr. Camillo spoke about, $8.1 million, and remediation money for Western Middle School fields of $8.5 million. We're still working on approvals for that, but it's a discussion that our board wanted to have with the BET. I think it's a good and worthy discussion. So where we started was our pro forma budget. Basically, if we were going to just stay in place for a year, it would have been a 2.62% budget. Basically, the assumptions were based on our contractual obligations. We are people-oriented businesses, Dr. Jones will elaborate on further. We pay those people, and we know what those salaries are as a result of contractual obligations. On top of that, we need a new program for our alternative high school, Windrose, so originally budgeted at $125,000. And then increased obligations for transportation and utilities. Just to put it in perspective, those are the biggest movers. People and transportation and utilities are the biggest items in our budget, and you'll see that breakdown. All right, this clicker is just not working for me. That's all right. So we started by looking at efficiencies, reductions, and deferrals. I want to give credit to Dr. Jones, her staff, as well as the Budget Committee of the Board of Education and the entire board for buckling down here. We looked at our preschool staffing ratio. We really don't want to be changing class size guidelines. We'll be talking about that, I'm sure, next week. But in preschool, there were some opportunities there. Freezing 2 positions at the central office, meaning not filling those positions. Eliminating a bus through efficiency, so we do routing checks all the time. Maintaining level staffing. Reducing funds allocated to HR settlements. We basically took a look at certain lines of our budget, took several year averages, and then we're able to find some efficiencies there. Reducing funds allotted to staff travel and extended school year. That's summer school for those of you who are not aware. And then removing costs from staffing and materials, coming out to about $1 million in reductions or cost avoidance. On the flip side, there were some things that our board wanted to accomplish. We set some goals actually starting almost immediately after the RTM meeting. What do we want to see in this budget? It's a continued discussion. We obviously have been talking a lot about transitioning from metal trays, from the disposables that we're using now to metal trays and dishwashers. Increasing professional learning for language arts. You'll remember last year we made a major cut in this area. We told you at that time this was not a sustainable cut. This is one area where we are trying to put some of that back, but never going to get back to where we were. Purchasing some text materials for very targeted areas. There's some very old books at the high school. The world has changed, you might have noticed, so we need to keep updating that. Adapting our approach to purchasing technology. We have reached, I would call it steady state in terms of how we're doing technology in the district, and we're changing our approaches over time to better reflect that. Special education, which Dr. Jones will talk more about. This is an area of extreme interest for the board for multiple reasons. And then food service menu enhancements. This is something we've been talking about some time. There was an article, I think, in the Greenwich Chime even today. Work has been going on for a while. We really want to improve the options offered to students, and you'll see there's a cost to that. Overall, would have come close to about $500,000 to support the mission of the Greenwich Public Schools. These are the big swings. These are the big changes and drivers in our budget, as I mentioned. Staff salaries, contractual payments is just the biggest driver in our budget. It always is going to be. Transportation goes up. We have a multi-year contract. We know what those costs are. We have to prepare for those. Utilities, Dr. Jones will talk to you very briefly, but lucky it's a small increase. And you'll see those drivers overall reflect 1.92%. Some of the efficiencies I talked about previously, and then on the bottom you'll see just what the other parts of the increase of the budget are. There's really not a lot of new in our budget. I want to reiterate that point. It's not meant to be a standing still. We don't want to just keep doing what we're doing. We're trying to improve, but not add to the bottom line, and that's where we're going these days. Just so people know, and this is something I've said before, and I cannot say it enough, it for the Board of Education is a 12-month budget process. I kid you not. The RTM voted last year, May 13th. May 16th, our Board of Education held a meeting and started to discuss our budget priorities for the year. Our staff starts working on our budget basically before the budget is done. They've already started thinking by the time we get to that May 16th meeting. We start to work on our priorities. Those priorities evolve over the summer, and obviously as we see the BET guidelines, we realize what we're up against. As I said, 2.62% is where we would have been if we just added in our contractual obligations and nothing else. We're at 2%, so I want to give credit where credit is due. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jones.
First of all, obviously, everything that we do in our budget is based on our strategic plan and what we want to accomplish in the classroom for teaching and learning. So we have our mission is based on academic, personal, and interpersonal. And so you'll see that inside the budget, where we've tried to target our dollars is to make sure they're targeted in the classroom. We are having great outcomes and student outcomes. 81% of our students met or exceeded their expected growth. We were also very excited to see we were in the top 15% of the state for our next generation science standards, which was amazing. It was an incredibly challenging assessment, and to be in the top 15%, we are very, very proud of that. When we look at what's happening with our exam scores, the number of students who are taking our exams is continuing to grow, which is wonderful, and we are maintaining an 89% of our students who are scoring 3, 4, or 5. Again, that's setting a national standard of excellence. Beyond standardized tests, of course, we're looking at, again, academic, interpersonal, our athletics program. We had 4 Next Gen on outstanding winners, which there are only 300 of those in the state, in the country. And that is just phenomenal. And we were just announced this week that one of them is one of the national finalists. We also have, as you see, many, many different sports and over 100 different teams. We really are excelling in academic, interpersonal, and athletics. We focus also on completing a task that was started last year, and those are program snapshots. And these were designed to provide insight to the investment that we're making and really digging in and looking at programs. And I will say the program snapshots are all available online for anybody that wants to look at those, but it's really going in and analyzing, are our programs being successful, and how much are they costing, and are they running efficiently in the way that we would like them to? If you look at a little bit of our demographics, sorry, I can't see. I can't see, even with my glasses. We have, when you look at our demographics for our enrollment in Greenwich Public Schools, this number does include our students who are outplaced, but even going into next year, you'll see a slide, we're relatively flat. I just want to point out on the bottom left-hand side, it looks like our free and reduced number has gone up slightly, but in fact, that was a change at the state level in how Medicaid is billed and how children are qualifying. When you look in the top right, an interesting statistic for us is that our English language learners has actually gone down over the last couple of years. And on the bottom right, what you're seeing is our graduation rate is, again, really holding strong, 96, 97% of our students. This is looking at next year's student enrollment projections. And what you'll notice is, as a total district, we're projected to go down about 48 students. Sorry, can you click? But when you look at that in grades 6 through 8, which is our middle school, 15 of 16 students are actually at one school, that's Western. And then, of course, you'll see in the K-5, we're going down 53 students. One of the questions that we always get, well, if you're going down 53 students, why aren't you losing 2 teachers? And that's simply not the way it works when you look across 11 elementaries, 3 middle schools. So this slide is just to be representative of, if you look at those teachers, 7 teachers that are in place this year, if they each have 22 children, and these teachers can be all across the district in 11 different schools, that's 154 students. So let's say next year, kindergarten is a little bit smaller. We have 7 classrooms, have fewer students in them with 17, you still need 7 teachers. And even if 2 of those teachers are in the same school, you can't put 17 and 17 together because that's too large for one classroom. And that's what we see happening next year. So our staffing model is flat. We're not gaining and we're not losing. This is just general fund revenue. The revenues are budgeted on the town of Greenwich side, but it's important to note that when you look at 2021, we are still expecting to see some revenue flow from the state. And one thing I hear as I travel around is that the state no longer gives any funding. Although it's not in Greenwich what we would like it to be, it's nice to know that at least they have maintained some funding, because if some of you that are budget watchers would know 2 and 3 years ago, very concerned they were going to zero out all state funding. This is looking at our operating budget, and again, we are a people-driven business, so what you see on the bottom right is 82.24% of our budget is people, and this does not, that's just salaries. So if we actually had our benefits in there, you would see that look more like 84, 85, but that really is the primary driver of our budget. It's teachers and it's staff to work with our children. When you look at our salary expense, to me, this is a really important slide because we, again, want to target our dollars in the classroom where our children, where our teachers are, and we spend 90% of our salary on people who are working directly in the classroom. In the red on the top, you'll see where it's central office administration. These are your senior administrators who are housed at Havemeyer and primarily do the work at the district level, is at 4%. And that's where we don't want it to grow. That's where we would like to be. That's a good percentage. But again, it's about making sure the dollars are targeted in the classroom. Transportation. When you look across the top, that's our K-12 transportation budget. One thing that has been new the last couple of years is the private school that you'll see down on the bottom left. 19% of our transportation budget is actually from the private school that used to sit on the town side, now sits in the school. And I do want to point out that just our transportation budget has an increase of 2.59%, a large increase, and yet we are sticking to that 2%, which means in order to fund transportation, we're reducing something somewhere else in the budget. Our school lunch fund, when you look at expense and revenue, on the left, you can see that it's 4.3 million in our expenses. On the right is revenue of 4.1, which is slightly less, which means that we do need a general fund contribution. And we're looking at that contribution being right around $216,000 from the town. But keep in mind, several years ago, really just if you go back 4 or 5 years ago, that number looked more like 600,000. So we are really starting to turn our food service in a more positive direction as far as revenue. If you look at our historical budget trend, and this doesn't go back quite 20 years, but for many years, in order to fund our schools, we were sitting right around above 4%, because that would take your contractual increases and make sure that you were also innovating within the school district. If you look at the last 10 years, you'll notice that the trend has been closer to 2%. And I think this is just good information for everybody to have, in that some people will say we may not have all of the same services that we used to have, and this is true, and that's what you're seeing reflected. The large bar in yellow, I just want to point out, that was the year when the transfer of private school buses, school nurses, and print shop were transferred. Now, overall, if you take the high and then you take where we are right now, the average is 3.1%. When we look at operations and management of building, on this slide, you can see the 1920 on the bottom, 2021 on the top. We're very lucky this year that our utilities are almost relatively flat. The increase is actually slightly in water this year. When we talk about private and public partnerships, I think it's really important to point out that Greenwich Public Schools does an amazing job working with people all across town, and this is not representative of every organization, but thousands and thousands of dollars are partnered with our schools in order to offer tutoring, all types of unique programming for our students, and we are very, very proud of that. If you look at our operating budget and our staffing, this is a really important slide, and I noticed it on the first selectman slide as well. It looks like the schools are going up 1.15, but this is reflective of preschool, and preschool is a rolling enrollment, which means that all year long we're bringing in new students, and when they turn 3. And in 18-19, in the spring, we added 3 sections, so they weren't in the budget. They were added in 18-19, too late to be in the current budget for this school year. So this is actually just, it's reflective of the staff we actually have. And in this budget, we are actually, because of our new pre-K ratio, actually going down a section. So this is not truly additional staff, it's just reflective of what we have now. Special education focus. We have a special education study planned in the budget for next year, and that will take place and we'll determine that scope. When you look at what's happening in special education, this is not a bar chart that goes out many, many years. When you look from left to right, we have added almost 200 students, which is a lot. And keep in mind that that's while overall enrollment has been declining. So you're seeing the percentage, and most people across the state are actually seeing the percentage go up. This is our special education out-of-district tuition, and it's an important slide because it's becoming more and more challenging for all school districts, not just in Greenwich. But we want to be very transparent and say at our last board meeting, we were sharing the financials that in this current year, this line item is already short $900,000. And so what that means is going into a budget that I'm just presenting tonight, and we're presenting, we know next year that it is already short in the budget for outplaced tuition based on the trend we're having this year. But we build our budget a year in advance. And so these trends happen throughout the year, and we think this is important to be very transparent.
And just something to add, last year, one of the only adds to our budget was $600,000 specifically for this item. So the 5.4 that you see reflects that $600,000 increase. So we basically are $1.5 million over where we thought we'd be.
And now we'll talk a little bit about the capital, proposed capital. Our capital budget, as Mr. Bernstein mentioned earlier, is right over 35 million, with major projects being obviously the majority of that. Developmental considerations. We have a master plan that's a 15-year master plan, and it is very focused on making sure that the projects we bring forward are those projects that there are deficiencies in a building or projects that we really need to be focusing on. That means buildings that are not ADA accessible, have fire safety issues, in that they're just older buildings, and that's how the master plan was constructed. We are also making sure that we're not bringing forward projects that we can't complete and that we can handle the workload capacity. And this is just a capital budget overview. We do update the board every month, and we think it's very important that people know that 2015, 2016, 2017 projects are completely closed out. And I just want to congratulate our facility staff because they worked incredibly hard to make sure these projects are getting closed out. When you look at 18, 19, 20, there is actually 26.3 million, and again, that was down from that 201. We are really closing projects. We are on top of our projects. I also think it's important to note that when we ask for funding in one given year, those projects are not completed in 1 year. And I think sometimes people think that they are supposed to be completed, but if we ask for money to, for instance, put in windows in a large school, that's a multi-summer. We can't put windows in December. We can't put them in over spring break. It takes the summer work, and our summer window is very short. And some people have had this question asked, well, why don't you wait and just ask for the money over 3 different years? The reason we don't do that is we would have to go out to bid 3 different times, more than likely end up with 3 different contractors actually putting windows in the same building. So we must ask for it as a project. We've also been focusing on Bloom Shapiro, which is a focus that the town had last year to make sure that our capital process is in order. We are completed several of those steps. We are in the middle of the ongoing components that you can see in the center there, where we've completed Munis training. That's ongoing, happens all the time. And one great thing is our new CFO does feel very comfortable and is excellent in Munis as well. We also have our contract timeline review. In the future, one of the critical pieces for us is to implement the management system for obtaining quotes and working through our projects, and we are actually getting the quotes right now for that management software. When you look at our major projects, I know several of these have been mentioned tonight, but I will just point out it's very important to our community, definitely to our PTA, who's had a strong voice, that Greenwich High School security, the entrance, be secured. Also, the expansion of Old Greenwich Elementary and renovation, the study for that. Again, this is one of our buildings that is not ADA compliant. Julian Curtis is also there in feasibility right now and working with an architect. We're asking for the design funds for that building. We've mentioned Cardinal. We've mentioned the Central Middle School field, and Western is the remediation. We also have in the capital the computer network infrastructure and our ongoing digital learning. You can see the breakdown there. One great aspect is we had a leasing system. This is the last year of that $70,000 lease payment, so that will not show up next year. Our annual infrastructure and facility improvement, what you're seeing is the kind of aqua color on the left is mainly heating and cooling, and then we also have space improvements. But again, this is all of our annual infrastructure that is really trying to be proactive and make sure we're not being reactive when things are failing. I'm sorry.
There is money.
Oh.
Yeah, no, you can.
Okay, sorry, thank you. So many of you probably heard in the press this week that we did have one of our connectors that broke at the high school and caused some flooding. That project to replace all of those is actually in this budget, but we will most likely be coming forward for an interim because we don't think that waiting until this funding happens in July when it could happen again. But we want you to know it was a request in this capital budget. So we have an operating budget of $166,631,476 that we're requesting. Again, we are right at our guideline of 2% that was given to us, and then the capital request just over $35 million.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you all, and thank you, Dr. Jones and Mr. Bernstein, Mr. Camillo. We are ahead of schedule, so I think if we'll take a short break, and hopefully you'll be back in your seats prior to 7 o'clock so we can begin extremely promptly at 7 PM for the public hearing. We are very anxious to hear from you, so we hope you visit with your friends in the interim, and we'll hear from you shortly.
That's good. to the Board of Selectmen. The whole thing with SEC and the RTM. I'm trying to clean up this mess. And now this. Full day.
Good.
I can choose tomorrow whether I want to go to the audit committee or go to the dentist. That's what I want. How's your foot? Very good.
Working out.
Tap dancing.
Well, I don't know about the tap dancing. Yes, yes. Thank you for
On the budget.
Oh yeah, thank goodness we don't have radio stations. Thank goodness. Oh, yeah, that's a big that's a clear channel. And now it's iHeartRadio. It's like Q1043 is yeah, basically like Z100 too, all those stations. It's like clear channel for everything. Yeah, they want to like robo like get these more for less. That's not us. We own basically every paper in it except for see what happens when I try to pull it out and jump on down. I always thought there was a better allocation of resources to be made. It came, to me, the initiative didn't come out of the cost cutting. It came from the chief and staff. Both kinds. Right. They feel they can use their resources in a better way. What's the drugstores have the offering of their it's true. Yes, I'm very curious. I put in here that we didn't get specifics. You think people would sit down and listen because they want to learn more about that garbage program too. But we'll see.
We'll see a terrific letter. Way to go. What? Well, I'm here to just listen.
Or is that public education? They're cards. They're cards. It's like
You know, I heard about it. I didn't see it. I thought you distributed it. I would love that. I was going to ask him for it, but I got so caught up in other things, and I figured you were Dan and speak tonight anyway. So. I won't get into all that.
Is this working? Hello, this is the 2-minute warning.
I wait for the 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
You gotta pick up your phone.
Yeah.
Here, give me your thing.
Hello?
I have my mic on.
Would you all get ready?
I don't think they're on.
Why are they not on? Hello?
Hello, mine's on. Is yours not working?
Mine's working now.
Hello? It's not working.
It is now, I think.
It's working.
No, it is. It's not very loud.
We're actually a little ahead of time still. Everyone just,
Go ahead and start.
you think I'm okay? So now we're at the 7 PM public hearing time, and this gives you the opportunity, the public, to provide your input on this upcoming budget. Again, a reminder, if you want to speak, please sign up to speak, and there's some sheets over there, and if you can bring them up front, after you complete them, if you can bring them up front to Kathy Sidor or Pete Minarski, we'll get it sorted into the group here. Again, Peter Minarski is our controller. Also, I'm sorry? And also, we also like what we'll do is announce the name of the speaker and the next speaker. So we'd like you to just sort of line up as is pretty traditional in town meetings. Each person will have up to 3 minutes to speak. So please state your name and identify yourself to the public. We have your name, but if you identify yourself, that will be helpful. Peter Minarski will be our timer, and he will give you a 30-second notice at 2.5 minutes, and he'll waive that. So we'd appreciate it if you would observe our time limit. And also, we look forward to listening to your support for or against any topic. But we would greatly appreciate your not being repetitive with prior speakers if that's at all possible. So we look forward to a very informative evening, and we thank you for coming. So we will start with Old Greenwich School, and we'll kind of vary it back and forth between schools and town, and kind of group them together if we can. So this is Old Greenwich School feasibility study, and we'd ask Jen Bencivango, please, to please, and the next person is Christina Broderick and Carolyn Peterson, also Old Greenwich School feasibility study. Thank you, and I'm sorry about the name. That's why we ask you to identify yourself.
You did an excellent job. It's Jen Bencivango. So good evening, Chairwoman Tarkington and the members of the BET and guests. My name is Jennifer Bencivango. I am a 22-year employee of the Greenwich Public Schools and the proud principal of Old Greenwich School. I'm here to ask for your support for the full Board of Education budget, but very specifically for your support of the feasibility study for Old Greenwich School. Our school is as close to a Norman Rockwell picture as you're going to get in our great town. We have 450 students arriving by foot, bike, and car to our plaza each day. While classically designed in 1902, our school is the oldest school building in town, and it's in desperate need of renovation. With over 5 different flooring levels and no elevator or lift, the school is not ADA accessible for the many students and their family members in attendance. In my 4 years, I have personally had to carry a student with a severely broken leg down the front steps of the school to a car waiting to take her to the doctors. Just last year, a 5th grader was in a bike versus car accident on Sound Beach while coming to school, and his injuries kept him in a wheelchair on the 1st floor of our building while his 5th grade classmates continued their studies on the 3rd floor because he wasn't able to climb the 3 flights of stairs or access a bathroom on the 3rd floor until his leg healed. Thankfully, in this technological age, we were able to have him video conference into his classes and brought small groups of students in his ALP class down to work with him. We had to hire a certified teacher to work as a substitute tutor throughout the day to continue his instruction. On Veterans Day, we invite veterans who are members of our school and local community to a special ceremony each year. We also include the clients of the River House who are veterans to attend that ceremony and be recognized for their service to our country. Each of those veterans who has dedicated their lives in service to us has to come in through a loading dock door and down a back hallway to the assembly. Even our front entrance of the school, which should be the welcoming point for our students, community, and family members, is up a full flight of stairs to reach the front door and main office. Certainly not the welcome that these veterans should receive when they visit the school, but sadly, the loading dock door is our only accessible entrance without having to traverse a flight of 4 or 20 steps. Despite this, we offer opportunities for our community to join in celebration of our students dozens of times throughout the school year, and we continue to meet those with physical disabilities at the back door to guide them to our gym or cafeteria, which is located on the first floor and the only meeting space in the building accessible to all. Grandparents and parents who can't traverse the stairs are unable to attend functions like open house in their child's classroom because we have no means of getting them to our second or third floor, and have relocated meetings to small storage spaces on the first floor when a mother 9 months pregnant with a broken leg came to school to attend a meeting for their child. As I said, our nurse's office is also on the second floor, which is quite a distance from our playground when children have to receive medical attention. I hope you all received our invitation to attend World Read Aloud Day on February 5th and will come to read to our students and take a tour of our building to see both its beauty and necessary improvements. We will continue to provide an exceptional education for the students of Old Greenwich and work each day to foster their growth as the future of our nation while we model for them advocacy for equal access for all members of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Christina Broderick and Carolyn Peterson, to be followed by Meg Nolan.
Good evening, members of the BET. Thank you so much for your service. As co-presidents of Old Greenwich PTA, we're here on behalf of the parents and teachers at our school to express our support of the Board of Education's budget as it relates to the allocation of funds to the design study for 2021 for Old Greenwich School. At Old Greenwich School, as you heard, was built in 1902, making it the oldest education building in the district, and today the structure is not ADA compliant. The building is not accessible to students, teachers, parents, or community members. Even when the school is utilized by the town of Greenwich as a polling station, it has to rely on temporary infrastructure to allow citizens to enter the building. Our front exterior staircase is a safety hazard, with concrete flaking and patched every year but still crumbling. Our back staircase is in a constant state of disrepair, even missing steps for months at a time. Due to the age of the current construction, repairs and upgrades cannot be undertaken by the Facilities Department for fear of uncovering issues in the walls. As an example, it took years of advocacy from parents and the community to replace a water fountain that no longer provided basic access to the students in grades 3 through 5. The renovation plan would take into consideration mitigation of the flooding that is taking place in our lowest levels due to the rising water table in Old Greenwich. It would be very disruptive to our community should the school be closed due to mold, as happened with our neighbors in Stamford. Lastly, given the school's open presence in town and lack of fencing or security, the possibility of an additional wing with enclosed courtyard under consideration would address obvious capacity and safety issues. Our community needs and deserves an accessible, safe building that can serve all the students, regardless of their physical abilities, and welcome all members of our community. We are proud of our teachers and staff and believe our building should be a reflection of the amazing moments that occur inside and out on a daily basis. In summary, we fully support Old Greenwich School's designation as a priority school for capital improvements. As a PTA, we surveyed our parent body, and 93% of the respondents said they support this budget item. At this time, I'd like to ask those people from Old Greenwich School who support the budget to please stand and be recognized. On behalf of the parents of Old Greenwich School, we thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Christina and Carolyn. We have Meg Nolan, followed by Dan Ozesmere.
Good evening. I'd just like to introduce myself. My name is Meg Nolan. I am the president of the Old Greenwich Association, and so I'm here on behalf of them, and we stand in full support of the Old Greenwich School PTA and all that they just got up here to explain. I'm also a parent at Old Greenwich School, so I feel personally obligated to tell you that the school is in dire need of repair, and all that has been said, well said by our principal and by the PTA presidents. And so I hope you recognize that the community and those behind the neighborhood association are also behind this BOE inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Meg. We have Dan Ozesmere, followed by Bruce Fluke.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. First, I want to welcome Dr. Tony Jones and Fred Camillo for their first budgets, and it was glad to see the brevity of their comments and look forward to working with them in the future. First, I'd like to take note that our first selectman has made some pretty tough initial decisions in his first budget. I know we've been talking about police on the avenue, Nathaniel Witherall, pay-as-you-throw, tipping fees for many years. I think these are decisions that really needed to be taken in terms of making our government more efficient and, addressing a lot of the budget issues. So I'm glad to see that those were put on the table. Clearly, there will be community discussion at the BET, RTM, and throughout our community about these issues, but I'm very encouraged that these were put on the table. I'd also note that, again, very encouraged on the public-private partnerships. As we know, there's a lot of wealth in this town. I think it's very prudent and sensible in this environment where, many taxpayers are struggling with falling home values and incomes, that if there are those that can help fund, significant projects, that we take advantage of those. Lastly, to the BET, I would notice that a lot of your guidelines were met, and I think that's encouraging. However, you had also requested that, both the Board of Ed and the First Selectman identify an additional $2 million in savings total, and I would encourage you to pursue that so that we can have a really good discussion about whether that is worth it, whether there are savings that make sense in a cost-benefit analysis. The reason this is very important is I think we all know about the property values in Greenwich, but next year, or actually 2020, there's going to be a reval. The reval of our property in Greenwich is going to change how taxes are distributed in this town. For example, recently New Canaan did a reval, and they had about a 7% reduction in their grand list. That's going to impact everybody, and in particular, there will probably be a shift in the tax burden from the backcountry to some of the lower-priced homes on the west part of town and closer to the post road. So I think it's very critical that in doing this budget, we're thinking not only about this year, but what it's going to mean for residents in the future, particularly after the reval. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Dan. So we have Bruce Fluke, followed by Brooks Harris.
Evening, Madam Chair, BET. Thank you for the time. I wanted to specifically talk about the capital budget, make some observations. Very admirable budget, but a couple of things to just bring to the attention. One is that on the general fund, X the sewer, it represents a 16% increase year over year. So that's a large increase, and I think it's an important note to make. If you include the sewer, which I just wanted to make a comment on that, it represents close to a 20% increase on the capital budget year over year. So that's a pretty big jump, and I think it's an important note to make. On the sewer, and certainly there's lots of advocacy for that, and it's an expense we need to think about and do, there is a $7 million increase in the budget, or a $7 million allotment for the force main improvement. That's a big number. And I think we all need that, and we need to reflect upon that, but just need to make the observation of the expense that's going on there. When we look at Sound Beach Avenue Bridge, $3.5 million, Bruce Park Bridge, $2 million, Glenville Road Corridor, $6.3 million, and the additional $1.5 million on the Arch Street improvement that we won't get reimbursed for. These are all large expenses, which then bring us to those numbers I just reflected on. So I just want to bring to your attention, as the Board of Ed was eloquent in their $35.75 million in the capital budget, that represents a 37% increase year over year. So these are big increases, and I just want to make that observation with that. And then in final comment, I did want to bring the attention of Nathaniel Witherall. And Nathaniel Witherall represents for fiscal year 19 an $8.5 million loss to the town when you include comprehensively pension costs and other things. So I just wanted to bring that attention to you, which you already know, and reflect upon those large number increases. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. So now we have Brooks Harris, followed by Ali Giori on reusable, if I haven't pronounced the name right, so you can identify yourself, reusable wares, so.
Great.
Brooks,
I'd like to thank the BET, the BOE, the First Selectmen, the other people who made this presentation possible, very informative. Today, I want to address the difficult cuts that were made and the fact that the budget came in within the guidelines. I want to thank the groups for making that happen. I know it's very tough, but I hope people appreciate that it's really important to do, because we have several factors that are going to make things very challenging for us going forward, and these cuts will help make them less challenging. Specifically, as mentioned earlier, expenses are going to go up by definition because expense increases are built into the contract, 2 to 3%, contracts, 2 to 3%. It's the majority of our budget. At the same time, when the grand list is stalled and isn't growing very fast, that implies mill rate growth even before we start spending more money. Then on top of that, we want to enact the BOE's master plan, which means increasing capital spending in some years by as much as 2 or 3 times. So those are going to mean that the mill rate is going to go up fairly dramatically. I'm here to advocate for not only the kind of analysis we've seen tonight, but also more robust long-term capital planning so the town can see the implications of the projects we're taking on, not just next year, but in the years to come. As people know, next year, any project that's approved this year is going to have very little expense associated with it. Those expenses are going to kick in year 2, 3, and 4, and when we approve them, it's important that people see the implications. So I appreciate all the good work that's been done, and I think we've got some opportunity to make our system even stronger. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have Ali, followed by Julie Deschamps.
Is it okay if we switch the order? So I go first and then Ally?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. My name is Julie Deschamps, and I serve on the Greenwich Recycling Advisory Board and the Food Service Committee. I'm joined by Ali Gorsi, a member of the RTM and Waste Free Greenwich, and by supporters who we ask to stand, please. Should $100,000 of your taxpayer dollars be spent each year to support a system of waste? Should students be taught that waste is acceptable, that our natural resources are expendable and lack value? Should our children be potentially exposed to toxins in the foodware their meals are served on at school? These are critical questions to address as you consider the proposal for reusable wares and dishwashers. While the Board of Ed recently eliminated toxic styrofoam trays from school cafeterias, lunches are now served on single-use molded fiber trays like these. These disposable wares are expensive, wasteful, pedagogically dishonest, and may put our children's health at risk. Each year, molded fiber trays and other disposable wares cost $62,000 to purchase, and another $39,000 is spent to dispose and incinerate this cafeteria waste. In total, over $101,000 of taxpayer money is literally tossed in the trash every year in school lunchrooms. This is not fiscally responsible. 500,000 non-recyclable trays are trashed and incinerated annually at a cost to taxpayers and the detriment of our soil and air quality. A pilot New Lebanon school proved that reusable ware system can cut 80% of cafeteria waste. It is time to stop our throwaway cafeteria culture. The use of disposables teaches our students that wasteful behaviors are acceptable. Instead, our public schools should model environmental stewardship and civic responsibility, values consistent with classroom lessons. For decades, generations of public school students were exposed to styrene, a probable human carcinogen and neurotoxin that leached into hot and acidic foods from styrofoam trays. At greatest risk were the students participating in the National School Lunch Program, who ate meals off styrofoam trays on a daily basis for up to 13 years. Why should we put our children at risk again? The molded fiber trays currently in use can contain PFAS, forever chemicals associated with adverse health effects.
30 seconds.
They were reformulated recently, and testing confirmed that they no longer contain PFAS. However, manufacturers are not required to disclose the chemical content in these products or inform consumers of changes in formulation. In an abundance of caution to our children's health, Greenwich Public Schools should replace these disposables with safer reusable wares.
Thank you, Julie.
Ally Giorgi. Despite these clear benefits, the decades-long efforts by advocates to find alternative styrofoam trays and now to transition to reusable wares and dishwashers have been characterized by some as symbolic. Others contend that money should be spent elsewhere. These critics are misguided and ignore the facts. Disposables are expensive, wasteful, and pedagogically dishonest, and may put our children's health at risk. There will always be competing interests and other priorities. How much longer will we wait to do the right thing for our budget, environment, education, and health? The time is now for the Greenwich Public Schools to transition to reusables. We just heard from the First Selectman that better management of our waste stream is necessary, a top priority for the town of Greenwich. The costs of municipal solid waste disposal and recycling are rising, and the town must act to address our waste problem. The First Selectman is proposing pay-as-you-throw to change habits and reduce waste, and a food scrap recycling program will soon be launched to cut organic waste. Shouldn't this waste reduction strategically apply to the public schools as the largest town entity and one of the biggest producers of this waste? Absolutely. The reusable system is a critical part of the broader plan of waste management for our community and should be a priority for the BET, the RTM, the Board of Education, and the superintendent. There are a few proposals for the reusable ware system under consideration. Individual dishwashers at each school, a centralized dishwasher at Greenwich High School, and the outsourcing of dishwashing. The Board of Ed tasked the superintendent and administration to thoroughly vet each option and to present the most cost-effective, sustainable, and effective solution to the BET. We urge the superintendent and administration to investigate these proposals expeditiously and comprehensively. We ask the BET to approve the funds requested for the reusable wares and dishwashers. Waiting another budget cycle means another 500,000 trays tossed in the trash, another $100,000 spent on the purchase of disposal of single-use wares, greater risk to our children's health, and another year of pedagogical dishonesty. Do not allow this opportunity to pass us by. Our community needs to take action now and lead the way towards a sustainable future by adopting a reusable system. Thank you.
Thank you. So next we have Diane Otto, followed by Lucia Jansen.
Yes, my name is Diane Otto, and I have been born and raised in Greenwich. And I have seen with my own eyes how people operate. I have been handicapped at a very early age, as are many others in this town. It is imperative that all of the policemen to be present for the safety and well-being of every individual. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was out doing some errands on the lower Greenwich Avenue. I was crossing on the crosswalk between Diane's Books, which is down a little, to Melly Malo, when out of the clear blue sky, a big blue station wagon veered right, hit me, dented her car, and I went flat on the pavement of the crosswalk. More policemen are vitally necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Lucia Jansen, followed by Cricket Diamond and Brian Peldunas.
Good evening. This is the first opportunity I have as BOC Chair of the RTM to publicly congratulate Mr. Camillo and welcome the new Superintendent, Dr. Tony Jones, as well as you, the new Board of Ed members and BET members. Welcome. We are all so lucky to be town leaders in one of the most beautiful, safe, and desirable communities in Connecticut and the United States. As we all know, the town offers so much for young families as well as senior citizens alike. I would like to begin by commending our town leaders for once again receiving the AAA rating from the top credit agencies. This is the highest rating possible and speaks to our excellent financial management in the past and to the fiscal year 21 BET budget guidelines. As you know, I sent you this week the annual BOC fiscal year 21 goals letter, where we do support the BET's fiscal year 21 budget guidelines. In the letter, we describe the very tough economic conditions. We all know that Connecticut is suffering from anemic job growth, job creation, especially high paying, stagnant home sales. And with this economic environment, it is reasonable and prudent to measure how much we are spending, our spending amount. The job numbers also came out today, and it reiterated what was in the goals letter, which is for the fiscal year 2019, there was a 0.2% job growth. We noted that the credit agencies highlighted that building permit fees are down, which speaks to the future. And so we think in the operating guidelines, which we mentioned in the goals letter, to consider your two-phase of spending reductions and savings, so that tonight the first selectman and the Board of Ed have presented the first phase of the budget guidelines. But the guidelines do recommend, in the event of the uncertain economic conditions, we may have to consider the second level. Most importantly is the flat headcount growth for the town. We also wanted to note, I wanted to highlight what was in the letter, which is the capital spending. We have over $100 million of existing open capital projects, and we just want to make sure that the town completes those before embarking on the $84 million that's in the budget. We look forward to working with you over the next month in the February hearings, and thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Lucia. We have Cricket Diamond and Brian Peldunas, followed by Susan Rudolph.
Good evening. My name is Cricket Diamond, President of Greenwich PTA Council, and with me is Brian Peldunas, First VP. PTA Council brings together the 15 individual school PTAs in Greenwich, and we are here tonight to represent the thousands of PTA members in our town. We want to begin by thanking all of you for your service to our town and for the important work that you do on behalf of our wonderful community. We appreciate having the opportunity to stand up and speak in support of the Board of Education budget. On the operating side, the budget represents a 2% increase over the 1920 budget. The budget continues the strategy of directing resources to schools and classrooms where students reap the most benefit. We believe that it is essential to fully fund the strategic priority of personalized learning to increase achievement for all students. Over the last 10 years, with one exception, percentage increases from contractual obligations have exceeded the percentage increase suggested by the BET. This results in a rise in the portion of the operational budget spent on dictated increases, primarily for staffing and transportation. These two elements now make up approximately 86% of the budget. It also results in a forced decrease in the absolute amount spent on other areas, including, most importantly, teachers' professional development, as was evidenced last year. Simple arithmetic shows a continuation of this pattern will result in contractual costs squeezing out all of the non-contractual costs. The impact of this squeezing out will be cumulative, meaning reduced or no professional development over an extended period of time. This will directly and negatively impact students. We support the proposed capital budget. We believe that the project laid out in the capital request are necessary and important. First, funds for regular maintenance and structural upgrades. We all know that it is financially prudent and less expensive in the long run to ensure that the schools are kept in good condition and not allowed to deteriorate. We appreciate your long-standing recognition of and support for these investments. Second, funds required to address capital issues. Focused projects include the GHS entryway, GHS Cardinal Stadium, the feasibility study for Old Greenwich School, the update to Julian Curtis, and our fields. PTA Council and the associated PTAs absolutely support the inclusion of these capital items in the 2021 capital budget. Both budgets are fiscally responsible and represent necessary spending and investment. We believe that cuts to these budgets would be imprudent and would negatively impact the students of the Greenwich Public Schools. The strength of our excellent education system contributes directly to the strength of our town's preeminent reputation. We appreciate your demonstrated commitment to education. We ask that you approve the Board of Education budget as presented to you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Cricket.
Thank you, Brian.
Next, we have Susan Rudolph, followed by Arthur Yee.
Thank you. So good evening. My name is Susan Rudolph. I have a couple of brief comments to make to you this evening. Over the past 3 years, my colleagues and I, along with professionals, scientists, physicians, have written letters, talked with Greenwich officials, and delivered testimonies about artificial turf fields. The message is very simple. Artificial turf is not safe for people, animals, or the environment. Secondly, we acknowledge the need for additional playing fields in the town. However, having presented data showing the perils of artificial turf, I have yet to understand how they can be considered safe or shockingly safe enough for Greenwich, especially for the elementary and middle school fields. I'm still waiting for a cogent reply. Finally, approximately a year and a half ago, I wrote a letter that was published in the Greenwich Free Press, and I said that leadership requires bravery, especially if the right decision may be unpopular with some people. So, having earlier this evening heard First Selectman Camillo's decision about option 1, providing natural grass at the Central Middle School, I want to thank him for his bravery.
Thank you, Susan. Next, we have Arthur Yee, followed by Ellen Wolfson.
Good evening. My name is Arthur Yee. I've been a town resident for about 50 years now. I actually attended Central Junior High School and graduated from Greenwich High School. And I was so happy to hear that the First Selectman tonight has come out with a position that he's supporting natural grass over artificial turf at the middle schools, especially Central Middle School. That is the right decision. And why is that the right decision? We know for a fact that artificial turf does have toxins. That's been spoken about many times, and I won't go into details of that. As a medical doctor, I also know that children, middle school children, have a high susceptibility to the insults they face in the world. And that's the reason why we vaccinate kids at childbirth against hepatitis B, We prevent them from smoking until age 21. And the American Academy of Pediatrics has advised limiting tackle football until the kids turn 14 years old. Right now, there are no studies that actually document the safety of artificial turf and children exposure, despite what some of the artificial turf proponents say. That's still not the case. This situation brings to mind two historical events that I'm glad won't be repeated because it looks like we're going to favor natural grass in our middle schools. In 9/11, 2001, when the World Trade Centers fell, if you remember, Governor Christine Todd Whitman, who was the EPA commissioner under George Bush at that time, prematurely declared that the air and the water was safe around ground zero. She stated that categorically 1 week after the towers fell. As a result, people went to work there, residents stayed there, did not evacuate the area. People commuted from out of town to go there. We all know now what happened. People developing cancers, lymphomas, leukemias, lung diseases. And she finally admitted when these people blamed her for their illnesses in 2016, she acknowledged that she made a mistake. She said she didn't lie. She said she made a mistake because she misspoke. She didn't have all the data available to make that statement. And I think that's very apropos to where we are now. We just don't have the data to say that artificial turf is safe in children. The second historical event that brings this issue to mind is when the cigarette companies, back in the 1940s, there was a link that was proposed between lung cancer and cigarette smoking. Despite good epidemiological studies, animal studies showing a clear link, and despite the Surgeon General coming out in 1964 saying there was a link between lung cancer and cigarette smoking, the cigarette companies did not acknowledge that until about 20 years later in the 1980s when they finally acknowledged that. And that was because they wanted to bolster and keep their cigarette sales up. So I'm so happy to know that we're probably not going to be put in a position where we're going to have to apologize to our children many, many years down the road after their playing days are over to say, I'm sorry we exposed you to these toxins. I'm so happy that won't happen, and I'm glad we're making the decision we're making. I'm glad to hear First Selectman Camillo supporting natural grass. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arthur. We have Ellen Wolfson, followed by Jennifer Kutai.
Hello, I'm Ellen Wolfson, a retired physician, and when I retired 4 years ago, I had the pleasure of joining the Commission on Aging and the Senior Center Board, and I'm here with that hat on tonight. I'm glad I'm not in your position. Everybody's offered such incredible support for their interests, and I'm thinking, here we are. I was thinking about asking everybody over the age of 60 to stand, since we had all the people who represented schools stand. I won't do that, but I think my point is well taken. The Commission on Aging does an unbelievable job for our seniors in town, and one of the things that impressed me most was my recent involvement with the Part D Medicare opportunity for all of our seniors who are eligible for Medicare Part D to come and review what their best plan was. And for the first time, I got to train for that and supported it, but also, unfortunately, for the first time in many years, the program had been changed by the federal government to a brand new program. We announced to over the 500 people who showed up to be evaluated for their Part D, we were amazed at the savings, some of which ranged from $1,000 to $4,000 of savings, And we were all very impressed, as were the people we took care of, until we noticed there was a pattern that distressed us. The federal program was incorrect. There were multiple errors. We had to, in a short period of time, send out over 450 letters, long, complex letters that some of you may have received, explaining that it was possible that the plans that they signed up for may have been incorrect, not because anything that we did was incorrect, but because the federal program was inappropriate. That resulted in a large number of telephone calls. Now I get to my message. We asked for, we have a very small budget that does amazing things, but we asked for $10,000 for a temporary part-time person to help with all of the extra things we do. We're going to be, probably we are, the first city in Connecticut to be named as a...
30 seconds.
Thank you. As an age-friendly community, something we're very proud of, but it required a monstrous amount of work. And that amount of money was cut out of our budget. It was $10,000. We were not allowed to do that aspect of our job. I don't know that I could see that the senior center can once again raise to the effort that they put into what they did for our seniors already. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ellen. We have Jennifer Kudai, followed by Alan Kudai?
Alon, my husband.
Alon Kudai?
So before the clock starts.
I'm sorry, are you speaking together, just so, or separate speaking?
Well, we're speaking, he'll finish my speech if I don't have enough time.
Okay, well, after, just to our own organization, so we have people line up, person to speak after that, after you all, is mic off, just so that,
Okay.
keep our process going.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
before the clock starts, I brought a picture of my daughter because I hope you remember her face when you're determining the special education budget. I hope it's a face you never forget. Certainly, we won't. So good evening. We stand before you tonight as devoted parents to our children, our community, and our children's elementary school. I'm a member of the PTA and have sat on the Green Schools Committee, Nominating Committee, Book Fair Committee, and I was co-chair for the largest school fundraisers, and I've been a class parent for the last 4 years. I chose to be an integral part of my children's school, not solely for my children, but for the betterment of my community in which my family has resided in for more than 30 years. Approximately 2 years ago, while in the 3rd grade, our daughter became a student of special education. We knew long before the 3rd grade that our daughter had severe learning disabilities, but obtaining intervention was a long and arduous process. It left our daughter with academic and emotional scars that no child should have to bear. It also left my husband and I perplexed as to why any parent should have to go to such lengths to get what any child deserves, a free and appropriate public education. Over the last several months, families have spoken up at BOE meetings about special education in the district. More than 400 families have banded together and formed a parent support group. I have spent the last 8 months listening to the most gut-wrenching stories of SPED families from across this district. I had one parent tell me about her son, who's a junior at Greenwich High and reading on a 4th grade level, and being refused a reading program despite the student begging for someone to teach him how to read. The parent told me the district doesn't care because they know she can't afford to sue. I had a member of your RTM show up at my home in tears. Her child had graduated years ago, but she still suffers the repercussions of her daughter's special education needs never properly being addressed. She left me with a shopping bag full of documents that told her child's entire story from kindergarten to high school. We must put an end to these injustices. Your actions, or lack thereof, are destroying innocent children's lives. 1 month ago, Dr. Jones reached out to me personally and offered to come speak to our parent support group during her personal time. There was a standing room only crowd, a crowd that also included Carol Sutton, the current head of the teachers union. Carol Sutton has been outspoken about the unbalanced teacher to student ratio. She has also spoken about teachers sitting in their cars in tears. Dr. Jones has reiterated the need for more funds in order to address the growing population of special education students. The number of special education children in this district is growing at an increasingly alarming rate. So are the number of lawsuits in this district, which parents almost always win and choose to outplace their children. Those outplacement costs to Greenwich are in the millions of dollars every single year and growing rapidly. Look at what neighboring communities are doing with the same special education issues. Darien, Fairfield, Stamford, they are all investing in their schools and their staff. This is your chance to break the cycle of failure.
I'm sorry.
Keep going?
Well,
My husband's going to finish up.
She said her husband, so you can just add the time, I guess? Is that-
Okay.
Okay, for 2 of them.
For 2 of them.
Okay. This is your chance to break the cycle of failure, a cycle that has been ongoing for 25 years. This district needs to revamp its entire special education department. None of this can occur if you don't address the financial needs of special education. Make the necessary changes. Provide funding for special education so that all children have a chance at a free and appropriate public education, which is what the law mandates. I stand here tonight before you, the parent of several children, a member of the PTA, an integral part of their schools, asking you for the last time to make change. We implore you to make this change, or we will continue moving forward until the necessary changes are made. Parents are outraged, and they are continuing to file violations with the state. We will take legal action in the same way that Darien, Norwalk, and Bridgeport parents have. We will continue moving forward for the sake of all special education children who, under your guise, will continue to be set up for failure in life.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Alan. Mike Goff, followed by Caroline.
What do you think I could do it?
Oh, well, Caroline.
Learn it, I don't know.
Follow Caroline Learned. Thank you, sorry. Mike?
Good evening. My name is Mike Goff, and I'm here to share some data that I hope will help you understand the need for improvement and investment in special education in Greenwich Public Schools. In the past, the district has used consulting studies, audits, self-assessments, and surveys to paint a picture of how well Greenwich is at serving children with special needs. Unfortunately, each of these assessment techniques come with flaws and biases and can be spun to tell the story the board wants to hear. I offer a more objective analysis based on the due process cases parents brought against boards of education across Connecticut between 2012 and 2019. Every time a due process case is resolved, the hearing decision is posted on the State Department of Education's website for anybody to read. Between 2012 and 2019, parents across the state of Connecticut pursued due process over 1,600 times. About 1,500 of these cases were settled, and 114 were fully adjudicated. A fully adjudicated case is probably the best way to get a clear, fact-based view of how a school system is supporting or not supporting a child with special needs. In these cases, witnesses testify under oath, documents are entered into evidence, parents, school representatives, experts, and lawyers make their best case, and an impartial hearing officer makes and documents a decision based on the facts and the law. I can tell you, pursuing a fully adjudicated due process strategy is stressful, time-consuming, and expensive. For example, our case with Greenwich took 15 months, 18 days of hearings, and we were out of pocket hundreds of thousands of dollars before the case was decided in our favor. The fact is, while due process is available to all parents, it is not a real option for most parents. So most parents have to settle and their cases are dismissed. In a settlement, parents must agree to never talk about their case with others. But this gag order does not apply to fully adjudicated cases where a full picture of what happened can be read. So of the 114 cases that were fully adjudicated over the past 8 years in Connecticut, 101 of them were with school systems outside of Greenwich. An impartial hearing officer decided those school systems lost their cases only 20% of the time. So how did Greenwich do? During the same time period, Greenwich lost 10 of their 13 cases. This means Greenwich lost 77% of the time, while the rest of the state lost only 20% of the time. And this is with the same group of hearing officers, typically the same group of lawyers, do the same thing. Greenwich has the worst record in the state by far. So how can this be? For years, parents have been told that Greenwich Public Schools can provide what children with disabilities require. The fact is, Greenwich loses these cases so often because Greenwich fails to provide appropriate services to children with disabilities. Certainly, changes in people, processes, and the use of technology can help, but investment is also needed. This is a call to action. Please do what you can to help Greenwich move out of its worst-in-class status in the state when it comes to educating our children with special needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Caroline Lerner, followed by Andra O'Donovan.
What's the last name?
It's Laram.
Laram?
Laram. And actually, my husband, Ed, is going to speak. But I also want to show you a picture of our son, Ben, who is a special education student.
Good evening. Ensuring a proper special education program is critical to ensuring that non-special education students are also receiving the best possible learning environment. Raising the bar for special education will have an impact on the overall classroom, like a rising tide that lifts all boats. There's a saying, parents are only as happy as their least happy child. I think
Would you like to come back?
No, I'm good. I'm good now. I think this concept not only applies to parents, but to the entire family. The well-being of a child impacts both the parents and the other children in a family. Taking this a step further, I think this concept also applies to the learning environment of a classroom. Both students and teachers are impacted by the student that struggles the most. So the saying that keeps playing in my head is a classroom is only as happy as its least happy student. I think about this in the context of my son, and I also think about his classmates and his teachers. A clear sentiment among parents and teachers is that special education department needs improved programs, more personnel, and more training. At first, this will need more resources, but in the long run, I believe it will save the district money. The PPS director has described special education as a wild card budget, citing deteriorating students and parents litigating for outplacement as causes for unpredictability. If we invest in special education now, these out-of-budget causes will decrease. For example, if special education students are properly supported early on, there won't be deterioration down the road. And if special education has the proper programs, training, and personnel, there will be less outplacements. Again, I'm talking about making investments. As such, I ask for your consideration to increase the special education budget to provide additional training, personnel, and improved programs. Investing in special education will lead to less student deterioration, less outplacement, less cost variability, and improve the environment for the overall student population. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Andra O'Donovan, followed by Pat Coleman.
Hi, my name's Audra O'Donovan, and I'm honored to stand here with my fellow parents who are bravely sharing their stories. It takes great strength for each of them to come up here and discuss not only their child's personal struggles, but also the emotional and financial strain that comes with it. Together, we are fighting for our children to receive a free and appropriate public education for which they are entitled. I have 3 children in the Greenwich Public School, each with their own unique set of learning differences. I'm a graduate of Columbia University with a master's degree in social work. I have been an administrator for a special education preschool in New York City, as well as an advocate for families. For the past 3 years, I've been the special education district representative for PTAC. I have also been my child's individual school rep for 4 years. I, too, have had to fight for every service each of my 3 children have received in this district. I am no longer employed outside my home because this never-ending battle to ensure that my children receive an appropriate education became far too consuming for me. While the opinions and experiences I share tonight are my own, they are far from unique. Each and every day, I communicate with other Greenwich parents who are confronted with the same roadblocks in securing the proper help and services for their own children.
What often starts as a child having basic reading struggles evolves into a child who becomes deeply depressed, loses self-esteem, and develops acute behavioral problems. Often parents' views are dismissed, but now it is no longer just the parents begging for help. Now teachers who have been silent for years of losing their jobs are now speaking out and vocalizing their desperation for help, training, and additional staffing. As we've heard tonight, you are seeing the numbers of special education students rising. That was obvious from the slides we just saw. The cost of children being outplaced to private schools are rising as well because our schools are not addressing their needs. And how has the board responded? What has happened is you suggested a 2% budget increase for the Board of Education. This is not addressing the problems, but rather putting a Band-Aid on the wound for far too long. You are investing as few dollars as possible toward the education of our most vulnerable population, our children, rather than trying to figure out how you can best help our children. For each child to reach their potential, even the special education and general ed students, it takes training for all teachers so they can understand the needs of each student. It takes high expectations and ambitious, appropriate goals. It takes accountability and objectivity, and it takes the willingness to be innovative. We cannot accomplish any of this with a 2% budget for the Board of Education. The mission of the Greenwich Public Schools is to enable every student to reach and expand their potential. Greenwich can be a model of what it means to help all students achieve this, but we cannot be that model with a 2% budget increase. We hope the board agrees and adequately funds the Greenwich Board of Education so our students are equipped with the tools to succeed and our teachers are proud to work in the Greenwich Public Schools.
Thank you, Audrey.
And these are my 3 children.
We have Pat Coleman, followed by Lindsay Fay.
What's your last name again? Sorry.
Patrick Coleman.
Coleman, thank you.
Right. I actually have a rhetorical question for the Board of Ed that the BET should be aware of. It's directed at the 2019 Board of Ed members. I have every reason to believe that the new Board of Ed members will have a positive and constructive impact on the current board makeup in our community. I wish you luck and thank you for your service. Let me preface my remarks by saying I stand before you as a parent of a special ed student who is thriving at Old Greenwich School. I can't thank those dedicated teachers enough. No buts. You rock. I know many others feel as I do. But here's my question to the 2019 board. Are you embarrassed? Are you embarrassed that dozens of children are still left behind in special ed? Are you embarrassed that families have continued to come forward to this podium and other means expressing their concerns yet nothing is truly advanced? Are you embarrassed that dozens of families are too scared and ashamed to come forward? They're fearful of retribution, yet their child continues to drift. Are you embarrassed that scores of teachers have privately expressed their concerns, yet are also fearful to come forward due to retribution? Are you embarrassed that some of last year's Board of Ed members feel the same way? I met with one Board of Ed member this summer for breakfast. It was 90 minutes about the disgraceful lack of response and empathy from the board. His words, not mine. Yet nothing was done. Another board member who is no longer on the board shared the same experience. Nothing was done. Are you embarrassed that a large subculture of fearful people are swimming around aimlessly while children are left behind? I'm talking about 4th and 5th graders with first grade level proficiency. The stories are endless. Are you embarrassed about the large legal line item for special ed defense? Are you embarrassed that the list of cases that went to due process rule against the town? I sat at the November Board of Ed meeting at Central Middle School. On the docket was the Cardinal Stadium project, something I'm very supportive of. I watched the Board of Ed engage in a passionate deep dive of the project. They grilled each other and the architect of the stadium. It went on for a couple of hours. Are you embarrassed that there hasn't been an agenda item, a real one, with transparency and teeth and the same engagement we put into the Cardinal Stadium? There's a leadership issue, and it's time this issue is addressed openly and constructively. This topic is not a third rail topic, it's a real one, and children are being left behind. Wouldn't it be great to hear how we could seriously chip away at this issue and legal defense bill and apply some of those funds to Cardinal Stadium and Old Greenwich School? Everyone would be a winner. I'm hopeful the new Board of Ed members can stand up and advance this issue because No child should be left behind, and dollars must be spent properly.
Lindsay Fahey, followed by Diana Martinez.
Ready? Systemic failure in GPS special education results in lawsuits. Nonetheless, the failure of our students, etc. Proof abounds from a $5 million budget line item for suing Greenwich taxpayers, also known as SPED families, angry families at every Board of Ed, and maybe soon BET meetings. And importantly, the astounding increasing losses in lawsuits. Between 2012 and 2018, I unfortunately did not have Mike Goff's data, so I don't have the 2019. We lost 97 there were 97 SPED cases in Connecticut. GPS students represent 0.17% of students in Connecticut, yet we are 10.7% of legal cases. Other Connecticut towns lose 20% of the time. We lost, over that period, 89% of the time. We win 11% of the time. That's failing. GPS features in lawsuits 63 times more than we should on average. You might be thinking Greenwich families are more litigious. Let's look at the comps. We think of ourselves as being like Darien and New Canaan. We have 9 lawsuits and 8 losses. Darien and New Canaan both have 0 lawsuits and 0 losses on those. Norwalk, 0 for 0. Norwalk, 4 for 0. Bridgeport, 1 for 0. West Haven, 1 for 0. Danbury, 2 and 2. New Haven, 5 and 0. That's an embarrassment. We are nowhere near where we think we are. These 9 cases are just a microcosm of the GPS SPED reality. I've personally sued Greenwich Public Schools twice and won for heinous and egregious, nonetheless illegal acts in the same time period, and yet neither are represented in this data or are counted, and nor are countless SPED families with NDAs to keep them quiet, to be able to get their kids their federal legal right to a free and appropriate education. The takeaway, GPS does not follow the law, and they know it. The real question is, are our educators breaking the law by accident because they're underinformed, or are they knowingly breaking the law while harming our children and risking our budget? My proposal is that the BET add a line item to the Board of Ed budget instead of enabling and condoning this sustained illegal behavior. Taxpayers have a right to know that their education tax dollars are being spent wisely and appropriately on education and not for lawsuits against little kids after GPS breaks the law again. Budget purpose. Every person interfacing with any GPS SPED student should be tested, ideally annually, on education law. Those taking the test will receive a grade by section. 504, IEP, LRE, FAPE, busing, whatever. Post-exam results in education will be provided to educators in all sections with weaknesses. This will include follow-up questions to assure their understanding. The cost, frankly priceless, but a whole hell of a lot cheaper than the over $5 million a year in lawsuits against little kids. But truly reasonable cost to be determined. I've been working with a law school and an expert in special education who are really invested in the idea and have thus far contributed over 100 detailed question and answers for free. The benefits to taxpayers, students, families, educators, and the Board of Ed members: less expensive lawsuits, hopefully removing the $5 million line item entirely, less adversarial relationships with SPED families, valuing our kids.
Tell her
educators without
Lindsay, you can finish your statement here.
We'll send the comments.
And truly advocate for their students
That's
on a
the
legal
supposed-
playing field. The Board of Ed and superintendent will have an appropriate understanding of how these individual actions by our educators are affecting our budget and be able to root out the cancerous individuals in our system, because it's not just one. You also have another choice. You have a $5 million budget item for families. You use that against families constantly. There are enough roadblocks for families to want to sue Greenwich. I mean, give me a break. So you could take that $5 million budget and you could make it $2.5 million to give to families who could take it on loan. And because if you lose, you end up paying for it anyway. So there's enough things in the system for families not to. And then you could make it that much more fair.
Thank you, Lindsay. Diana Martinez.
That's me.
Followed by Ed Lerner.
My name is Diana Martinez. Good evening. I'm a former teacher in the district, and I also have two sons with special learning needs. I actually had the double whammy effect of fighting for my children's educational rights and also the educational rights of my students. And the stress of trying to do both of those things at once did me in. I need to point out that while you've been guarding against even the most modest of budget increases, the needs of our students and teachers have been sharply on the rise. According to the CDC, autism is up 15%, childhood anxiety up 20%, ADHD rates are up by about 40%. Suicide rates among children doubled between 2003 and 2017. Keeping the budget increase within 2% is frankly a luxury of the past. Welcome to 2020. Our schools need more social workers. Our kids need specially trained special education teachers and paraprofessionals, and their teachers desperately need professional development to address these new challenges. When I taught in the schools here, I had many children with autism and ADHD. I have never once had a professional development offering on how to support these students in my class. Instead, one supervisor advised me to ask a literal question and call on the child with autism, then ignore his hand when it repeatedly goes up. When one child engaged in self-harm in my class, the dean of students told him to just smile, with no further instructions on how to prevent this in the future. One administrator refused to grant a student with autism paraprofessional support, even when several of his teachers explained the level of disruption he was creating. So she insisted we send him to her whenever he created a disruption in class. Of course, she was too busy or unavailable, so he was usually sent right back to class, creating an even worse disruption. At a recent board meeting, one member questioned the need for behaviorists in our budget, but actually behaviorists consult with teachers to manage behaviors. They collect data on behaviors, provide interventions, and then monitor those behaviors. They use science. It's frankly embarrassing that in Greenwich, the policy for supporting these students in our classrooms is catch as catch can and fly by the seat of your pants. We also need to attract strong candidates for the job of paraprofessional by providing them with respectable salaries. We need to pay for their training. There are wonderful paraprofessionals in the district, but the job pays so little, and in some schools, it's hard to find anyone up to the challenge. Many of us were stuck with paraprofessionals who needed to be told to put away their phones and needed to be reminded to work with the students in their charge. Behavior issues are the number one reason that students are outplaced, but those behaviors become intractable when we do not have properly trained staff. Also, research shows that early intervention is key, but we have students on the western side of town who are getting diagnosed with autism in middle school for the first time. These schools need additional funding to address the intersectionality of issues for low-income families of color who also have children with special needs. They face multiple systems of discrimination and disadvantage. The early intervention starts here, and it starts now by properly funding our special education program for everyone.
Can you either send in your, have you finished? Either send in your comments or maybe come back.
We can't do it if we stick to a 2% increase, and our low mill rates are frankly not worth it if it means turning our backs on our most vulnerable children and their teachers.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Diana. Ed Lurum, followed by Lucy Von Brockel.
I already spoke.
Oh, you already spoke? Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Hi, Lucy
And then we have Lucy Von Brockel. Lucy, followed by Laura Costin. Okay. Thank you, Lucy.
All of the people that just spoke kind of put a lot of weight on the idea that our mill, and I'm here actually just to talk about our focus on the mill rate and how that often comes up in your budget discussions, and cutting spending are such a huge focus for the RTM and the BET. I grew up here and I returned here to raise my family, and I will admit without shame that low property taxes were a major contributing factor to that. Partly, in addition to that, was the free babysitting from grandparents and the good school system and the beaches and parks and access to New York City, et cetera. I don't want higher taxes. I don't know who would. I don't want to lose services. I don't want the town to spend wantonly, but the more involved I've gotten, the more frustrated I've become by this laser focus on our mill rate and cutting spending without consideration of what the consequences of those things are. I see some of our spending, not all of it, as investments that have a return. And I don't see our town legislators looking at those returns very carefully. And I think that what we just heard is an example of that. We are not investing to get, I'm overwhelmed by some of what I've just heard. Anyway, I've heard a lot of people say that our mill rate is central to the health of our local economy. But I think it's important to note that our economy is not doing as well as our peer economies. So we can't just constantly say it's the mill rate, it's the mill rate, it's the mill rate. That's why people love Greenwich, it's the mill rate. It's not. There's something else going on here that is stagnating our growth. And I think part of that is the fact that we do everything we can to spend the least and to do the least and to plan the least. And I think it's time that we start focusing more on the benefits rather than the costs. Whether it's the health of our students or the health of our town or what have you. Anyway, I think that's about it. I've covered all of it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Lauren Costin, followed by Molly Salibi.
Hi, I'm Laura Costin. I'm a member of the RTM in District 8, and I'm currently assigned to the Budget Overview Committee. But before I get to that, I just want to make a shout out to you brave parents who just spoke. I'm a parent of a student at Central who has a 504, and you guys are awesome. That was badass. So I'm here to talk about the Budget Overview Committee's goal letter, which I read with interest, and I'm sure some of you who've received it did as well. It was interesting to me on a few levels. The first being, because our committee never voted on it, it should not be considered a Budget Overview Committee letter. And I, for one, do not and would not ascribe my name to it. The letter pretends to encompass a view of a committee that is made up of public officials, yet it is not actually available to anyone else, that it has not been emailed to, and that is unacceptable to anyone who believes in an open and accountable municipal government. I am also not in agreement with this document because there are certain shortfalls in the data. There's reference to a Federal Reserve report on page 1. The report by the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia does not spell out a case of gloom and doom for Connecticut, and I would argue that since Connecticut is not in the Philly Fed's purview, a more accurate barometer of the state of Connecticut's fiscal situation can be found in the fourth quarter report of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, which does cover Connecticut, and I won't bore you with any more of those details. However, the letter also contains subjective statements like town spending remained high in fiscal year 2020 in the budget. $444 million in the town's budget is a lot of money to me in my house. But I just want to point out that last year, all we found to cut from the budget as an RTM body was $38,000 for management confidential staff, $100 for, the search for a new location for a Northwest Fire Station, and $200,000 for a propane station out of a $444 million budget. So, I just want to keep that in perspective. One more thing, there's a line in the BOC goals letter that refers to the Board of Education saying that it should implement additional operating spending savings of $1.15 million. I do not believe that that is a good idea. I believe that is a disastrous idea. The Board of Ed detailed $500,000 in cuts at its December meeting, cuts that would not impact the classroom. Further cuts to the operating budget are impossible without compromising the quality of the education we are offering our children. And I can tell you as a parent, with one child at Greenwich High School, one at Central, and one at North Street, that, we are already fundraising for our needs because we did not even get enough money from the Board of Ed or the town for security cameras at our school. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. We have Molly Salibi, followed by Claire Kilgallen.
Claire left. Thank you.
Oh, Claire left.
Kilgallen left.
Okay, thank you. Can I just, give me 1 second, Molly?
Oh, sure.
So then Molly will be followed by Warren Silver then.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Molly.
You're on.
Okay, Molly Salibi, I'm District 8 RTM Vice Chair and a Budget Overview Committee delegate. And I am going to echo what my colleague Laura stated, which the BOC budget goals letter that was sent to the RTM, to the First Selectman's Office, the BET, and the BOE does not reflect in its entirety the full views of all BOC members, I for one, and we did not take a vote on it and really didn't have extensive conversation in committee. And one specific line item in there which speaks to substantially closing out capital projects before taking on new ones, I am categorically opposed to. And folks who have heard me speak before have heard me for the last few years talking about my views on the substandard, what I view substandard infrastructure in this town. And let's take the example of Old Greenwich School, the more than compelling case that the parents and PTA members here made tonight. Imagine withholding funds for Old Greenwich School based on not completing other projects. Dr. Jones also addressed that, and a lot of things are getting closed out. And I also ask you to increase the special education budget. I've lived here all of my life. I'm one of 6 children. We all went through the public schools. I naively assumed before I joined the RTM that our special education program in this town matched the education in general in the Greenwich Public Schools, which is what we are known for nationwide. And I was shocked. And while the Old Greenwich school stories bring a tear to my eye, I could shed buckets of what I've heard here tonight. I think it's disgraceful and we should all be ashamed. Lastly, with respect to public-private partnerships, and I have a background, I spent 10 years as a development director at the largest public television station in this country, Channel 13 WNET in New York, in fundraising. I understand public-private partnerships, and I heard tonight some good things. I urge that there be an open and transparent process for public-private partnerships, and if the First Selectman's Office, the Board of Selectmen, doesn't have a policy on public-private partnerships, that one ought to be set before monies are decided, just as they are discussing an advertising policy. And we all need to remember that these are our town-owned assets, and I'm delighted that there are members of our community who wish to help and to bring down those costs, because I would like to see things renovated long ago. Eastern Greenwich Civic Center, for example, I mean, it's the same as it was when I was in the 7th grade roller skating there to Freebird on a Friday evening. And it's just disgraceful. And the Old Greenwich School, the steps were mentioned years ago. The PTA had to fix them. We need to take care of our buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. So we have,
Is it me?
Warren Silver's next, you said.
right. I did say Warren Silver, followed by Leanne Tell.
Good evening. I'm going to be pretty brief. I really am here tonight just to thank Fred Camilla for finally taking a position, for standing up and taking a position in favor of grass over artificial turf at Central Middle School and limiting the Board of Education to option 1. I'm ecstatic that we have a new leader in town that's willing to take a position for 3.5 years. Countless and thousands of residents have signed petitions supporting grass at all our middle schools and elementary schools, and had to have fought against the Board of Education, who's responsible for protecting our children, having to try and convince them that all the carcinogens in grass in turf is terrible for the kids. So I just want to thank Fred for standing up and taking a position in favor of our kids and protecting our kids. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Warren. We have Leon Tell, followed by Doreen Pearson.
Good evening. My name is Leanne Tell, and I'm also here to thank the First Selectman for reducing the Central Middle School field budget line so that can cover the cost of putting in a proper draining system and properly maintaining the grass fields. The decision to reduce this line and advocate for natural grass versus artificial turf is the right decision, and I applaud the First Selectman Camillo for putting our children's health and the environment first. I have 2 children at Central Middle School who walk across the field to school every day, and they thank you as well. I want to mention that both my children play sports at Central, and they want to be able to play without compromising their health. This is an amazing decision, and I applaud First Selectman Camillo. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Leanne. We have Doreen Pearson, followed by Tony Turner. Is Doreen here?
Good evening. Thank you for allowing us to speak to you one-to-one. My name is Doreen Pearson. I live on Maple Avenue in Greenwich. I'm just been elected to the RTM in my District 7. And I can attribute being elected to an awful lot of work that I've done in my neighborhood over the last 2 years. I've been fighting against the incursion of tax-exempt entities into a residential neighborhood on the basis of something that was only recently passed, an HO with an expansion of FARs. One of the elite private schools set their sights on expanding into our residential neighborhood on a half-acre lot that was always deemed residential. It had, prior to this point, been approved for 2 condominiums, of course, residential use. I collected petitions, I met with all of my neighbors, and despite overwhelming support to oppose this particular use mid-block on Maple Avenue, Planning and Zoning ruled against us and granted this very mixed-use commercial tax-exempt property. I'm currently fighting one on the other side of me. I'm a budding neighbor to the Second Congregational Church, which also is before Planning and Zoning with a huge special permit zoning change to Maple Avenue. It's a large parcel of property. It is tax exempt already. They have had multiple uses on the property since it was purchased in 1952 and taken off the Greenwich tax rolls. Most of the uses of the property have been without any proper permits. I know we're abutting neighbors, and we never received any notices. What I'd like to, every time we battle this, I've spent 2 years in endless hours. Endless hours fighting high-priced attorneys that are very practiced in presenting their cases to Planning and Zoning. What I'm fighting against is the aggressive legal minds that beat down the neighborhoods and continue to take properties off our tax rolls, our residential tax rolls. These properties don't pay any taxes for any of their services. They receive many, many town services. Sorry. 2 seconds?
2 seconds, but just concluding sentence, please.
Yeah, I think we should look into this, and there should be some sort of payment in lieu of taxes. All of the tax exempts, the elite schools, the hospital, they all receive tremendous services, and the same things that we all pay taxes for.
Thank you, Doreen. Thank you. Tony Turner, followed by Michael Baumgarten.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. I swore to my wife that I wasn't going to say anything tonight, but I guess things change. I want to speak to the special education need, but I think in a very different way and at a different angle, being a former BET member. I have shared with all of you before, our son has several educational challenges and is at Eagle Hill, among them audio processing disorder, ADHD. He's on the autism spectrum. He has learning disabilities, and because of those have some very significant social anxieties. I could continue with more detail, and I'll give you a couple. We, just 2 weeks ago, filed for due process. We went down that journey for right at a year before making the decision to do that. He was in the Greenwich public school system. He was missed in his diagnosis not once but twice of being on the autism spectrum. Now the school district is saying they want to conduct their own test. We agreed to that. We agreed to that in August. Next week is February, and he still has not had the test. And again, I could go on, but as a former BET member, I would point out a couple of things. One, as you know, the audit committee is responsible for risk. This is a major blinking light of risk that needs to be addressed. And when you saw earlier the $900,000 above the $5.4 million, that's just getting started, because when you heard earlier that the 400 families are very focused, they're coming together, they're willing to do something, they are. I've been to those meetings. And not only do I think it's a significant point of risk, but as you all know, we recently had to increase our commercial liability coverage. Our deductibles went from $1.5 million to $3+ million. That's only going to get worse. And I can recall conversations of we all kept thinking, let's look for ways to have the learned lessons meetings to get to the root cause of the problems and get the insurance premiums back down. That's not going to happen with some of the things that you heard here tonight and what's coming. So I would just urge you to not only be empathetic with what you've heard, but as wearing the BET hat, it's a real risk issue. It's going to cost the town in the long term more than if we just stand up and say, let's get all the bad news out. Let's get to the bottom of the root problem and begin to make some changes. That's going to be very tough to do in this next upcoming budget season. But I would urge you to start. You've got to start addressing the risk right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. So we have Michael Baumgarten, and then we don't have anyone else at this point, so if anyone else wants to speak, this is your last opportunity to sign up. So,
Good
thank
evening.
you.
My name's Michael Baumgarten. I'm a parent. I had a daughter that went through the Greenwich Public Schools. My son is currently at Eastern Middle School. I am speaking tonight. It's been about an hour and a half of public comments, so I'm going to keep this very brief. I am speaking tonight in support of the school budget that's been proposed by the chair of our Board of Ed and our superintendent. I don't think there is anybody who can question the amount of work and diligence that the Board of Ed and their superintendent and the school district has put into in producing a very comprehensive, a complex document that respects the desires of the town to keep the mill rate low, and that the parents, that their children be educated. I would ask that there not be any reductions made at this point, that the budgets as presented be approved by the Board of Estimate and Taxation. And I want to recount one thing. When we moved to this town, we looked at a few others. And the towns that were not supporting the schools, when we saw it in the newspaper that there were disputes, that the budgets were being cut, we figured this is not the place for us. What will drive growth in Greenwich is not only a lower mill rate, it's families wanting to move here. It's young families with children looking and saying, this is a place I want my children to grow up in. This is where I want my children to be educated. This is a town that supports all of its community, students who are going to the public schools as well as to the private schools. I'm sitting here for about an hour and I'm looking at the mural here. This is the growth of Greenwich from the beginning to where we are now. It's not only about keeping the mill rate low, keeping costs down, and I think the town has done a wonderful job of that, and we benefit from it. It's about growing. It's about growing the grand list. It's about attracting families and making people want to move here. So I would ask, the economy has been going great for the past few years, since 2010. This is not the time to be asking for further reductions on a budget which is fairly austere, and where we have a superintendent and a Board of Ed that have worked so hard to come up with a budget that balances all of these very difficult needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have Claire Kilgallen. We saw back. Okay.
Had to pick up my son.
Okay. Thank you, Claire.
Time was pressing. Good evening, Chairman Tarkington, members of the Budget Committee, First Selectman Camillo, Superintendent Jones, Chairman Bernstein, fellow taxpayers and residents. My name is Claire Kilgallen. Just to comment on some parts that I did here. For the senior services, that $10,000 budget item that they were asking for, if you only base that on the $500 people that were served for that Medicare D, we're talking about $20 a person. I think that we can say that every senior citizen is worth $20, and I'm sure that when you run the numbers of how many people are served by the senior center, it works out to far less than $20 a head. Similarly, on the comment about Old Greenwich, when people come to this town looking for the investment in this town, when they look at their homes that the realtors are bringing them to, and then they look at the facilities, that helps make the decision where they go. We need to invest. And just a reminder to the other people in the room, because the board already knows this, Old Greenwich was on the list last year to move forward with JC and Riverside, but the BET decided to only move forward JC. Let me start my regular remarks by saying thank you for the opportunity to speak, and that Greenwich is a great place to live in. There are great things that happen throughout the town because of the dedication of many like yourselves. I support the proposed budgets as submitted. And I want to give some observations as to the budget process that I've seen over the years. Last year I spoke before the full board and talked about a topic that bears repeating in this budget, concerns about deferring projects, deferring compliance, deferring innovation, increasing liability to the town. For leaders to be set up for success, especially leaders new to the town or in a new role, they need to have the right tools and resources to do their work. These kinds of changes need support throughout the town, not just from the First Selectman or the Board of Education, but also from the Finance Board. Yes, efficiencies can be gained in many ways, such as strategic enterprise sourcing, vendor contracts with key performance indicators that have meaningful redress, but often modernizing processes to make executing work more efficiently requires investment, especially when legacy systems are decades out of date. Sometimes that means an increased headcount or adding tools like a license for project management software. In order to be forward-thinking, sometimes the old methods of doing things has to be left behind. To support the work of leaders doesn't mean micromanaging. Sometimes it means one-time increases that should be additive to the budget. The achievements of our senior high school students that were talked about earlier are the results of investments by this town years ago. With the past few years of program cuts, I don't know whether that's going to continue. Please support the budgets as proposed. Enable our leaders to lead. They're not mere caretakers. They are leaders. Respect the hard work of their teams to meet the BET's guidance. Support the requested funds to properly improve infrastructure, provide services, maintain excellence in our education and the town overall. The budget where we're at right now is a death by 1,000 cuts, and it cannot continue without sacrificing what the value proposition of this town is. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah. Haven't we seen this? Lydia Plascon, followed by Hector Azeno, sorry.
Lydia.
Lydia Plaskin. Hi, I wasn't going to speak tonight. I'm a special education parent, but these other parents and their strength encouraged me. It took 4 years for my son, who has autism, an auditory processing disorder, a reading disability, executive functioning deficits, and a reading disability to get services. It took 3 requests for assistance. The school system evaluated him before kindergarten, amazingly found nothing. And I knew there were problems, and my husband was like, well, the school says there's no problems. And so you have families, mothers and fathers fighting each other. And finally I said to my husband, I'm going to do my own testing, and you could take me to court if you want to. And it turns out I was right, and he had a whole array of problems. Even after the evaluation that I had from a very reputable place that my pediatrician recommended, he was denied services. It took a special education advocate and a lawyer to get him services. I'm like, sometimes I can't even sleep at night, because 4 years with all of his issues and his labels, where would he be today if he had gotten help when he was 3, when I first came to you?
Good evening. My name is Hector Arseno, and I am RTM member, recently elected, District 8, and I am...
Say your last name again.
Arseno. A as in Albert, as in Robert, Z-E-N-O.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't know.
And I am delegate on the Finance Committee, and I am also a tour guide at the Greenwich High School. So having said that, and after listening to many families today, touring families from other independent schools in town, there is not much of a problem, they know the town. And also, we tour families from out of Greenwich, basically New York City, coming into and looking into Greenwich, as much as looking into New Canaan, Darien, other Westchester places, Westport. With the high school, my conclusion after listening all these months, these families happily impressed. Classes, teachers, during the tour, hour and a half. However, let me tell you, very, very negative comments about other middle schools and many elementary schools. Very negative comments about the infrastructure and what we are offering in Greenwich.
Thank you, Hector. So I want to thank everyone for coming tonight and participating and staying to listen to your neighbors, and have a good evening. Thank you.